There is a kind of person who walks into a room and immediately understands it. They see who has the power. They see who is afraid. They see the alliances, the grudges, the hunger hidden behind polished smiles. And they do all of this quietly, without moving a muscle. You have met this person. Maybe you called them charming. Maybe you called them lucky. Maybe, if you're being honest with yourself, you were a little afraid of them, and didn't he? Know why? You weren't afraid of their strength. You were afraid of something harder to name. You were afraid of their clarity. We live in an age obsessed with intelligence, IQ scores, Ivy League degrees, vocabulary, people flexing the names of books they haven't read. But none of that is what I'm talking about. Cleverness is not intelligence. Intelligence is raw processing power. Cleverness is knowing what to do with it. Intelligence gets you the right answer on a test. Cleverness gets you out of a room before the test even starts. The cleverest people in history, Talleyrand, who served 4 French regimes and outlived them all. Benjamin Franklin, who charmed both kings and revolutionaries. Zhuge Liang, who won battles he was supposed to lose. These people were not always the smartest in the room. They were the most awake. And here is the dangerous truth that nobody will tell you. Cleverness is not born, it is built. And tonight, I am going to show you exactly how. What you are about to hear is not a self-help lecture. It is not a motivational speech. It is not a listicle dressed up in a YouTube thumbnail. This is an autopsy. We are going to cut open the minds of the cleverest people who ever lived and understand precisely what made them different. Not the myths, not the inspirational posters, the actual mechanics, the cold, honest structure of a clever mind. There are 5 reversals, 5 shifts in thinking that separate the merely intelligent from the dangerously clever. Pay attention, because some of you are already doing this without knowing it, and some of you have been the target of someone who was. Reversal 1. Stop trying to win arguments. Start trying to understand positions. Let me tell you about a man named Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, born into the French aristocracy, became a bishop, then a revolutionary, then a minister under Napoleon, then a spy against Napoleon, then a statesman who helped redraw the map of Europe at the Congress of Vienna. After Napoleon had already lost, he served the Ancien Regime, the Revolution, the Empire, the Restoration, 4 different governments that despised each other, and he died in his bed, at peace, with honors. How? When someone asked him his secret, he reportedly said something devastating in its simplicity. I never said more than was necessary. Most people think cleverness is about having the best argument, the sharpest rebuttal, the cleverest comeback. They walk into conversations like gladiators, ready to fight, ready to win. But watch what happens to people who always need to win arguments. They stop listening because they're too busy loading their next point. And the moment you stop listening, truly listening, you go blind. You stop seeing what the other person actually wants, what they're afraid of, what they're protecting, what they would trade if someone offered them the right thing. Talleyrand listened first. He collected positions the way a chess master collects potential moves. Not because he agreed with everyone, because he understood everyone. And understanding is power. There is a famous psychological principle called the Einstellung effect. It was studied extensively in the mid-20th century, particularly with chess players. It found that the more expert you become, The more your brain wants to apply the solution, it already knows, even when a better solution is available. In other words, expertise creates blindness. The clever mind resists this. It holds its own conclusions loosely. It asks, what am I not seeing? What would I have to believe for the opposite to be true? This is not weakness. This is not indecision. This is the radical discipline of keeping your mind open under pressure. The reversal is this. Stop trying to be right in every conversation. Start trying to be informed. The person who understands the most is never the loudest one in the room. They are the quietest, and they are the most dangerous. Reversal 2. Your reputation is the weapon. Your actions are the ammunition. Music becomes slightly darker, more cinematic.
In 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated on the floor of the Senate. The conspirators believed, genuinely believed, that Rome would be relieved,
that the Republic would be restored, that they would be celebrated as liberators. Instead, the city turned against them within days, and standing in the ruins of their plan was a 19-year-old boy. His name was Gaius Octavius, grandnephew to Caesar, named heir in Caesar's will, and by every measurable account. No military experience, no political base, no army, no money, no allies. He was nobody, except for one thing. He understood that in politics, the narrative is the battlefield. Octavian, as history calls him, did not try to be powerful. He performed power so consistently, so precisely, so patiently, that power eventually had no choice but to become real. He cultivated the image of pietas, duty and reverence. He made the right symbolic gestures at the right symbolic moments. He let Mark Antony make the dramatic moves. He let his enemies overextend, and he waited. For 30 years, he waited and maneuvered and built, and then, at the age of 44, he became the first emperor of Rome and ruled for another 41 years. The psychologist Robert Cialdini spent decades studying influence. One of his most disturbing findings: human beings make the vast majority of their judgments not from direct observation, but from reputation and social proof. We do not judge people by what they do. We judge them by what we expect them to do, by what others say they do, by what they have done before. Your reputation arrives in a room before you do, and it stays after you leave. Clever people understand this completely. They curate their reputation not through arrogance, but through consistency. They know that a single well-placed action in the right moment, in front of the right audience, can be worth 100 quiet accomplishments. This is why Benjamin Franklin, who understood this better than almost any American in history, deliberately asked his political enemies to do him small favors. The Benjamin Franklin effect. Ask someone who dislikes you for a small favor, and they will like you more afterward, because the human mind cannot hold the dissonance of doing something kind for someone it despises. It resolves the tension by deciding, perhaps I don't dislike them after all. Franklin wasn't being manipulative. He was being clever. He was engineering the conditions for a better reality. The reversal is this. Your reputation is a living, strategic asset. Protect it obsessively. Shape it deliberately, because the world does not respond to who you are. It responds to who it believes you are. Reversal 3. The cleverest move is often no move at all. Music pauses for a moment, then resumes, quieter. There is a concept in Taoist philosophy called Wu Wei. It is often translated as non-action, but that translation is misleading. Wu Wei does not mean doing nothing. It means doing precisely what is necessary and nothing more. It means moving with the situation rather than against it. It means knowing when force will work and when it will only create resistance.
Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, the man who unified Germany in the 19th century through a combination of war, diplomacy, and breathtaking strategic patience, was a master of this principle. He once said something that should be hung on the wall of every boardroom, every political office, every bedroom where ambitious people lie awake at night. Politics is the art of the possible, not the art of the ideal, not the art of the right, the art of the possible. Bismarck never fought battles he couldn't win. He never pushed situations beyond what they would bear. He had the extraordinary discipline, rare in powerful men, to stop when he had enough, to not overreach, to sit with an incomplete victory and know it was enough. Compare this to Napoleon, brilliance incarnate,
Military genius of the highest order, who could not stop, who always needed more, who kept pushing until the machine he had built collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. There is a cognitive trap called escalation of commitment, studied rigorously in behavioral economics. It describes the human tendency to pour more resources into a failing course of action simply because you have already invested so much. The clever mind recognizes this trap, and it has the courage, and it is courage, real courage, to stop, to disengage, to wait, to let time do what force cannot. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your current problems are not problems at all, but the consequences of actions you should never have taken because you couldn't bear to do nothing?
How many fights did you start because waiting felt like losing? How many words did you say because silence felt like weakness? The reversal is this. Restraint is not passivity. It is a form of aggression so refined that most people cannot even recognize it. The person who knows when not to move controls the tempo of every game they play. Reversal 4. Learn to think in systems, not stories. Human beings are story-thinking machines. We have been telling each other stories for 100,000 years. Stories are how we make sense of chaos. They have beginnings and endings, heroes and villains, causes and effects. They are beautiful and they are dangerous because the world does not run on stories. The world runs on systems. A system doesn't care about your narrative.
It doesn't care who deserves to win. It doesn't reward the protagonist. It rewards the person who understands how the gears turn. In the 1970s, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who would eventually win the Nobel Prize, discovered something disturbing about how humans think about cause and effect. We are extraordinarily bad at it. We see patterns that don't exist. We attribute outcomes to skill when they were luck. We attribute failures to bad luck when they were skill. We look for stories and we find them, whether they're there or not. They called one version of this the narrative fallacy, the tendency to create coherent, causal stories out of random or complex events. The clever mind fights this constantly. When a clever mind looks at a situation, it doesn't ask who is the hero and who is the villain. It asks, what are the incentives? What are the constraints? What feedback loops are operating here? What would have to change for the outcome to change? Think about how Zhuge Liang, the legendary strategist of the Three Kingdoms period in China, defeated armies that were 3 and 4 times his size. He didn't outfight them. He understood them. He understood their supply chains, their communication lines, their commanders' psychological weaknesses, their political pressures back home. He thought in systems, and then he pulled the thread that made the whole system unravel. The reversal is this. Stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what system produced this outcome? And how do I change the inputs? The person who thinks in systems can see 10 steps ahead, not because they're smarter, because they're looking at a different game than everyone else. Reversal 5. Your greatest teacher is the person who humiliated you. This one will be uncomfortable. In 1905, a young man named Albert Einstein submitted his doctoral thesis to the University of Zurich. It was rejected. His physics professor at ETH Zurich had described him as a capable student, but not exceptional. In the 1840s, a young writer named Fyodor Dostoyevsky was arrested, sentenced to death, led to an execution square in St. Arraigned, and at the very last moment, as a calculated act of psychological cruelty by the Tsar, had his sentence commuted to hard labor in Siberia. He spent 4 years in a Siberian prison camp, and when he came out, he wrote Crime and Punishment. The Idiot. The Brothers Karamazov. Some of the most devastating, psychologically precise literature in human history. His time in that camp didn't destroy his insight into the human soul. It produced it. There is a concept psychologists call post-traumatic growth, studied by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun in the 1990s. It describes what happens to certain people, not all people, but certain people, after catastrophic failure, loss, or humiliation. They don't just recover, they grow past who they were before. And the difference between the people who break and the people who grow is not resilience in the way conventional sense. It's not gritting your teeth and pushing through. It is the willingness to ask what the situation is teaching you. Every failure contains a precise diagnosis of your weaknesses. Every humiliation is a spotlight on a blind spot you didn't know you had. Most people spend their whole lives defending their ego against this information, building narratives that protect their self-image, blaming circumstances, other people, bad timing. The clever mind does something different. It gets quiet, it sits with the discomfort, and it asks, with cold, merciless honesty, what is this telling me about how I operate? Machiavelli lost everything, stripped of his position in Florence, tortured by the Medici government, exiled to his farm. And in that exile, in that humiliation, he wrote The Prince, one of the most precise, unsentimental analyses of power ever produced. He could only see clearly after he had been broken. The reversal is this. Your failures are not obstacles on the path to cleverness. They are the path. Every person who ever outmaneuvered you was handing you a master class. The question is whether your ego is too fragile to enroll. Synthesis. So let us pull these 5 reversals together. The clever person listens more than they speak and understands before they conclude. The clever person manages their reputation the way a general manages their supply lines, with obsessive, long-term care. The clever person knows when not to act and has the discipline to hold that stillness even when every instinct is screaming to move. The clever person thinks in systems, not stories, and looks for the levers that most people never see. And the clever person treats every failure as a teacher because they understand that the most expensive education you can get is the one where you already think you know everything. None of these are personality traits. All of them are practices. Talleyrand was not born with his composure. He built it. Octavian was not born with his patience. He forged it in 20 years of political survival. Bismarck was not born with his strategic restraint. He cultivated it against every impulse in his nature. Cleverness is not a gift. It is a discipline. And like every discipline, it requires you to be honest about where you are failing. Closing, here is the question I want to leave you with. Think about the last time you were outmaneuvered. The last time someone got something you wanted. The last time a conversation didn't go the way you planned. The last time a situation produced an outcome that surprised you. Now ask yourself honestly, were you listening? Or were you performing listening while preparing your next move? Were you thinking about the system or the story you wanted to be true? Were you managing your reputation or letting it manage itself? Were you willing to do nothing? Or did you act because inaction felt like losing? And when the failure came, did you sit with it honestly? Or did you build a story that protected you from what it was trying to teach? You don't have to answer that out loud, but you have to answer it because cleverness begins not in the books you read, not in the strategies you memorize, but in the brutal, uncomfortable, necessary act of seeing yourself clearly. That is where it starts, and most people never go there. If this conversation meant something to you, share it with someone who would genuinely rather not hear it. Those are always the people who need it most. And if you want to go deeper, the next video is already waiting for you.